the long weekend, and we won't be long today. I think this session is going to be very quick, understanding that there's a lot of things that are happening wherever we are, but we thought that we should stick to tradition. Right, so basically, in our session today, we're going to be talking and briefly demonstrating how to conduct a thematic analysis. Right. So what we're going to do is we're going to the same traditional approaches that we do in terms of doing them thematic analysis, the Brown and Clark thematic analysis. We're going to convert it in such a way that we do it using AI tools, the ChatGPT and other LLMs that we might have exposure to. But as usual, I prefer using ChatGPT because ChatGPT normally is a free version. Right, ChatGPT is a free version. ChatGPT is a free version that most of us have access to. First things first, as usual, what we need to understand is before we get to conduct the thematic analysis on ChatGPT or any LLM that we know, we need to have a brief definition of an understanding of what it entails to do a thematic analysis, right? But before we get there, let me introduce myself. My name is Dr. Moringa. I'm a founder of AfriLeader AI, and my experience involves participating in the drawing up of the UKZN AI guidelines, and I was also part of the task force framework, UKZN AI task force, and been involved in great deal assisting the various departments and faculties and HODs and deans in terms of how to navigate the AI in research and thesis examination, trying to address those issues. So to date, we've conducted training across the country and trained over 1.5 academics and researchers that we've trained, and we still continue to do this. So we do this every Saturday. This session we conducted every Saturday on free of charge, so that we expose our postgraduate researchers to the nuances of AI and how we can ethically use it within our research processes, right? So we every Saturday at 10 to 11, but today we're going to be very quick because it's we understand that there is a holiday that is in motion and most of us are with family and friends. Right, so a qualitative, a thematic analysis, we know that it mostly is applied in your qualitative studies. That's where we normally apply the thematic analysis, right? It ties really well with the capabilities of your LLMs, right? Because of its requirement of identifying, analyzing, and interpreting patterns, which we normally refer to as themes in the data. Right. So what the Brown and Clark thematic analysis does is what the LLMs do on a daily basis, on every task that you set to do, that you do on ChatGPT, Cloud AI, any generative AI, because what they do is that they are using probabilities to identify patterns within data that they've been trained on, so that they'll give you the nearest and the most probable response, right? So that process is a pattern. It involves identifying patterns and interpreting patterns in response to your prompts or the question that you would have asked them, right? So that's what LLMs that do, the generative AI do, before you get the response that you get from there. So we're saying thematic analysis is commonly used in interviewings, in focus groups, and textual data, and it's flexible and applicable across many disciplines, right? It cuts across. You can use it in where you're doing content analysis, you're doing your interviews, your focus groups, you do the textual analysis, or when you're doing mixed methods or studies. Only when it is not applicable when you are doing a purely quantitative study, right? That's where we have limitations in terms of thematic analysis, right? So but it applies in various disciplines. So normally the thematic analysis focuses on meaning, patterns, and interpretation rather than numerical analysis, right? We don't normally deal with numbers in here, in our qualitative thematic analysis, right? So what is key to the qualitative research in social science is central to in your media and communication, in various areas where you can use it, right? So drawing on Brown and Clark thematic analysis approach that was first brought done in 2006. There are different stages to getting to producing whether you're writing an article, whether you're doing your in the findings and analysis section for your PhD or masters or your honors. Normally there are 6 steps that you have to take for you to conduct the traditional thematic analysis approach. But like I said, the traditional thematic analysis approach provides the foundation for us to conduct. It's actually an entry point for us to do the same approach on our LLMs and generative AI platforms. So the first one, which is familiarization, where you would read and reread transcripts. For example, you've done interviews, you're going through those interviews and trying to understand what is the data saying, what are the key things within the data, right? Then you go to your generating codes, where you generating initial codes that capture the ideas from the data, right? Yeah, these are just what is the data saying and what are the key codes, right? Before we actually speak about or talk about themes. Then the third aspect is searching for themes. Right now, in this process of searching for themes, you are collecting those codes that have come then into potential themes and sub themes, right? I'll demonstrate how this process can work on ChatGPT, on LLM. Then when you've done that, the reviewing of themes, you need to refine themes to ensure that accurately reflect what the data is saying. So you're going back to the themes that you've identified, and you now want to contrast them with if this really what the data was saying. Then you're defining themes, naming and describing themes with clear boundaries, right? Then you go to your write up. But in between this whole 6 step, there's a lot of things that as a researcher you'll be doing, right? You'll be writing down notes, you'll be bringing things together, codes, you'll be erasing, deleting some until you'll be color coding. So the traditional thematic analysis approach, as beautiful and effective as it's been over the years, we increasingly identifying and realizing that it is manual, it is time consuming and iterative, right, in nature. right? For people or for researchers with the large data sets, you've done your interviews, there are 100 or 1,000 of them. Doing the traditional manual, time consuming and iterative traditional thematic analysis process will take you ages to complete, right? So, and we now see that AI, the large language models, or your in vivo, Atlas, etc., can now shoot, circuit the process. They can streamline that whole process. I mean, if you're familiar with ChatGPT, you know that there's PSS extension or plugin on ChatGPT. There's NVivo, there's Atlas on ChatGPT. So in as much as all those tools are necessary, right, that whole process of fragmentation way of conducting your analysis or your thematic analysis, it doesn't need to happen on different platforms anymore, right? Because that process was fragmented. You go and transcribe the data there. After you transcribe the data, you need to upload it on NVivo. After NVivo, you generate codes and themes. Then after that, you need to review them. And after you review them, you need to now start to extract quotations, the verbatims, and so that process becomes cumbersome, right? And we know that the process in any study, in any research project, the process of data collection, analysis, and reporting of findings is the one that takes the most amount of time. It's the one that takes the most amount of time. So because of that, we see that AI has the potential to transform this whole process. And that's what we need, and we're going to be demonstrating here. So what are these LLMs, ChatGPT? I mean, we know it's been 3 years since we have the ChatGPT, OpenAI was introduced. And after that, the number of the platforms has increased exponentially. If on a daily, there is a platform that comes out, right? So these platforms here, well, ChatGPT, Cloud, and Gemini, they're trained on massive text data set to understand, process, and generate human language at scale, right? And this is what makes them a game changer in the process of data analysis, because their capabilities already is such that they run and so and interpret and analyze millions and millions of data set available on the net, right, in a very short space of time. So if you're dealing with your large sets of data, this will be your go-to, right? This will be your go-to platform. So what do they do, right? And what is it in them that we need for us to transform our data analysis, that we would otherwise have done traditionally? So there are a lot of parallels, right, with the capabilities of ChatGPT, Cloud, and Gemini with the thematic analysis, right? They are actually in sync without us wanting to do the thematic analysis, generating codes and patterns and themes, right? Following the Brown and Clark thematic analysis, their capabilities already of ChatGPT, Cloud, and Gemini are such that they are doing thematic analysis, right? In their natural, or in the natural sense, right? They are already thematic analysis platforms, because what they do is that they look at the data that has been that has been fed into them and look for patterns, right? So that's what they do in their natural state, right? Before we want to use them for anything, their natural capability is running on data and identifying patterns and themes. Then they present to you the most probable on probabilities, the results, right? So what they do is that they do pattern recognition. They identify recurring ideas across large data set, right? Which is one of the key fundamentals of thematic analysis, right? So this they tick the box, right? Then language processing, they understand context, nuances, and meaning in text, right? Which is what we want to do when we are doing a thematic analysis, right? So they have that capability already that is required in a thematic analysis approach, if you remember the 6 steps that we said, right? Then the summarization and coding, right? They generate codes, cluster ideas, and create themes, right? That's what they do. So, which is another fundamental step within the Brown and Clark thematic analysis, right? Then they support. Then now what they do is when we employ them to our thematic analysis approach, they do assist, and we don't want them to replace the researcher. We want them to assist. They shouldn't replace the researcher's judgment, right? So the aspect of human judgment and academic integrity and the integrity of data should always be maintained, right? So we're saying let's employ them, but let's not replace our critical thinking. So we're saying, why then should we use AI in thematic analysis, right? That's what I was trying to explain in the previous slide. I had to say, these are the best go-to platforms in terms of when we want to do thematic analysis approach, regardless of what their shortfalls are that we'll talk about, right? Their limitations. But in terms of efficiency and speed, right? They dramatically accelerate data familiarization and initial coding phases, right? You can run thousands and thousands of data set on these platforms. I'll give you an example of what the journals are doing now. I know for a fact that Frontiers, if you are familiar with publishing in Frontiers, Taylor and Francis, MPDI, and Emerald, what they do is that the moment you submit your manuscript, it is run on AI to pick up and identify the key things that are required according to their template in a manuscript before it is sent out for review. So their technical checks are not human done; they actually done by AI. And your Frontiers said they run at least 40,000 manuscripts in five minutes, right? So they doing what they simply doing is that they doing it is increased. So what is, in other words, it's a pattern identification. They're looking at whether the manuscript that you have submitted is aligned to the key fundamental requirements of the manuscript according to their template, right? It looks at technical checks. It looks at if there's an introduction, if there's an abstract, the ethics, if there's an ethical declaration, all those things. It looks at those things. So it guys basically doing some thematic analysis. So their platforms are trained to run those checks for them, right? So we're saying, why then should we as researchers, right, in our postgraduate stage, use thematic analysis? We say we must use thematic analysis because it assists us in increasing the speed and efficiency at which we do familiarization and initial coding phase, right? If we want to familiarize ourselves with the data, say you have 10, and I will demonstrate 10 transcripts that you have. You can run those 10 transcripts in a minute, right, and get an idea of what the participants were saying or what the textual data was saying. All right, so that's the best and most compounding advantage of you doing thematic analysis. Then we have pattern identification. They assist in spotting patterns and recurring ideas across large data corpora, right? This is the key strength of AI, the generative AI platforms. This is their key strength because the capabilities that are embedded in them naturally, right, from the outset, they are meant to identify patterns, right? They are meant to identify patterns and spot patterns and recurring ideas across large data set. So if you're working on a data corpus or data set of around 10 or 15, right, it's an easy way for them. It's a walk in the park for them to do that because already they do millions and millions. right? So they assist also in thematic clustering. They help cluster data into themes and sub-themes systematically, and also do cross responses, comparison. They support comparison and contrast across multiple participants' responses. Very good at that. And also, they can retrieve the verbatims. Now, they also enhance analytical thinking, right? They can strengthen critical analysis when used reflectively by the researchers. I know a number of studies that were done and conducted in China and the USA, where the examiners were given two PhD theses, right? The one whose thematic analysis was conducted using an LLM, and the other one was done by a PhD student, right? And in terms of depth and in terms of critical analysis, right? But I should emphasize that the one that was done by with the assistance of AI, the student or the PhD candidate had applied their critical thinking on it. It's just not copying and pasting. And the examiners were presented with these two pieces of work without knowing which one was done using with the assistance of AI and stuff like that. And they reflected that the one through which AI was employed, right? It had it was more critical and had more depth as compared to the one that the candidate didn't employ the thematic analysis with the assistance of AI. So, but there are also other studies that produces different outcomes, of course, that we should consider, right? But I'm just giving you a point in um, uh, what has been found out there in terms of how AI is transforming the thematic analysis approach, right? So our AI-assisted thematic analysis approach has 6 steps, right? And these 6 steps, we are borrowing them from the traditional Brown and Clark thematics analysis approach. But whereas in your AI one, you need to begin by preparing and cleaning the data. You have your interviews, right? That you have. The first thing that you need to do is you need to clean and anonymize that data before you upload it. You need to remove identifiers, format consistently before AI input, because if it is messy and problematic, the problem with AI is that it picks up the low hanging fruits. So some other words or commands or instructions and questions that might be hanging in your data, right? They might influence the pattern recognition or the final outcome of what comes out. So every word in a command or in a prompt, right, affects the output, right? That's why we say it garbage in, garbage out. The quality of the outcome is dependent on what has been prompted, right? So after that, you need to upload those transcripts. I know ChatGPT, you need to upload 10 at a time, right? If you want to increase efficiency, right? Then you need to prompt AI to generate codes. Then you need to prompt it to cluster these into themes, then refine conceptually and interpret and then write, right? So we're saying AI supports each of the 6 stage, but human validation and intellectual judgment are essential throughout the process, right? So the first stage, we're saying cleaning. Stage 1 and stage 2 is cleaning, formatting, analyzing, removing identifiers before AI input. Then stage 3 to 4, you need to prompt AI to extract key ideas, then group codes into broader conceptual categories, right? Then stage 5 and 6, this is the researcher refines, and this is where we're saying the researcher should come in terms of verifying the whatever that has come and interpreting these themes, and AI generates writing structure. So you can have AI assist you with generating these structures, right? Then coding with AI, right? So what AI does, right? I see there is a hand. We'll take the hands between this stage and moving on to the practical demonstration. Right. What AI does, number one, it identifies the key phrases, the concepts, and the patterns quickly in the coding process. Right. Remember, you need to start with the coding process. Then, number two, it generates initial codes across large data set at speed. Then, number three, it recognizes both explicit and implicit meaning in the text, and it does surfaces patterns that might be missed by manual reading. And the researcher's role, then, I mean, this is what I always emphasize, that the researcher's role is slowly being transformed, being changed, right? When we are talking about doing research in the age of AI, I've always emphasized that in the process of data analysis, right, when you are employing the thematic analysis approach, the researcher's role has shifted drastically, and we need to appreciate that change and that shift. I know my colleagues from universities, various universities, especially senior colleagues, they still forcing their students to do the traditional way of generating codes by doing color coding, right? Say print out that data, or on your computer, color codes, read through the data manually and color code, identify color, then you say this color, then after that color you have blue, yellow, red and stuff, then you move those into the themes, initial themes and stuff like that in a manual way, right? Well, while that might equip a student with that traditional approaches of conducting a thematic analysis approach, we need to move and towards where we are at the moment, because this AI and these platforms, they actually have transformed the way we do things, right? So if you remain stuck in your traditional way of doing things, you might be disadvantaging the student. And we need to question if we are producing students that are industry responsive and ready for the industry. Because in the industry, right, there is no time to do the traditional Brown and Clark way of doing things, right? You need to know that there is no time to do color coding, right? If you work for a large firm that is working on data collection and analysis, they will tell you that we have a large data set of 2,000, right? We don't have time to sit down and do color coding. So we need to reinterrogate this as researchers, or as supervisors, as academics, to say, what are we training our students to do? If we are training them the traditional way of thematic analysis, that training should be juxtaposed with the AI tools that are available in terms of running data, right? Because those are the skills that are required in large firms, large data collection, large research firms, right? So we're saying now the role of the researcher is slowly shifting, or has shifted, to being a reviewer and to critically evaluate OA generated codes, right? So instead of you being immersed in the process of color coding the data, reading each and every sentence in your data, you can familiarize your data by generating summaries from the data that you've run on ChatGPT, right? So you command ChatGPT to say, let's familiarize ourselves with the data. What are the key nuances that are emerging from these data, from this data, right? So you need, as a researcher now, you need to refine these codes to say, no, these codes, let's refine them so that they allow, or they align with our research questions and context. Because you know the context, then add interpretive depth that AI cannot provide alone, and never treat AI generated codes as final or authoritative. So if you look at it, if you're a qualitative researcher, we're saying in the age of AI, or when we bring in AI tools, your role has actually shifted, right? From wanting to play the role of a research assistant who is supposed to generate themes and codes, you are now the curator of the data, right, of the output that would otherwise have emerged. You now the overseer of what the data that is overseer, right? You now the reviewer. You're critically engaging and you're bringing in context and aligning with the research questions that you have set out before when the study began, right? So from codes to themes, right? So assuming that you've generated those codes, right? So I'll give an example of codes that we have here, power imbalance, fear of failure, identity struggle, belonging. So the AI now will do is that if you give it a prompt, it will then move from these codes that are more than 6 of them to bringing them together. So it brings in, for example, it brings in power imbalance, identity struggle, and belonging into a single theme. Right now, the theme becomes navigating power and identity. So all these happen through the coding or the prompting that you'll be doing, right? So the this begs now the question that what are the skills that the researcher in the age of AI requires to know? So the first thing that you need to know is you should familiarize yourself with the traditional way of conducting thematic analysis, right? Using the Brown and Clark or whatever the approach that you're going to be using. Because if you don't know how to do the thematic analysis, you would not know how to conduct the same on an AI platform. So we're saying we should never release or we should never replace the fundamentals of traditional thematic analysis. What they do is that the AI platforms, what they do is that they increase the speed of doing what we already know, right? You wouldn't uh, produce the best outcome of of a thematic analysis chapter if you are not familiar with the different stages of conducting a traditional thematic analysis approach. What you want to do is to do the manual aspect of it, right? But the knowledge and know-how, you still need to know those. So researchers must ensure that the themes are conceptually meaningful and move from descriptive to interpretive, right? So let's look at the strengths and limitations of AI-assisted analysis, right? We're saying why we should adopt AI tools in terms of our thematic analysis. Number one is that it increases speed and efficiency, drastically reduces time spent on initial coding and data familiarization, which is the process that takes the largest amount of time. It assists with identifying patterns across large volumes of data that may be missed manually, right? Human researchers have limitations, and we are saying the LLMs and generative AI platforms, they have capabilities, right, to do pattern recognition on large volumes of data set. And this is where we must employ and deploy them, right? Large data processing, it handles extensive data set that will be impractical for manual analysis alone. So we are saying, advocating for us as researchers to actually adopt all platforms or all AI tools that enhances this process, right? But there are limitations, of course, right? It has a tendency, I know ChatGPT has a tendency of producing surface level themes that lack analytical depth and nuances. But this limitation, we have come up with ways, and there's a training that I did, I think 2 years ago, on conducting thematic analysis or writing your analysis or your analysis chapter using ChatGPT. It's available on on YouTube, where I demonstrated how to circumvent all these limitations, right? So lack of contextual understanding. So it cannot grasp lived experiences or cultural nuances or disciplinary context, but with the help of the researcher themselves, they can bring in that context, they can bring in that natural nuances and disciplinary context into the platform. Right, it's very possible. So risk of over reliance. So researchers may uncritically accept AI outputs, right, without sufficient scrutiny, which is one of the limitations that we find over time. Our masters and PhD and honors students, they are working against time, and some more often than not, they will tend to just copy and paste without them actually interrogating the outputs that has been generated with these platforms. So we said we require human interpretation, right? We say we need to be critical, we need to be theoretically informed, and analysis must come from the researcher, not dependent on the platforms they sell, right? We need to talk about ethical consideration. We're saying we need to protect confidentiality. And the challenge with these large data platforms is that they have a tendency to not protect the data of the researcher, right? So we're saying never upload sensitive, identifiable, and personal data into AI platforms, right? And you need to always anonymize all data before AI interaction. The challenge is that with data protection or data security is that we do not have control of how or what your data will be used for the moment you've uploaded it on ChatGPT or on other platforms. You've basically ceded control of that data, right? So we need to verify AI outputs, always cross reference AI generated codes and themes against the original data source for accuracy and fidelity, right? You need to avoid misrepresentation, right? Do not present AI generated analysis purely human generated, and accurately represent your analytical processes. And then researchers accountability, the researcher remains fully responsible for the rigor, quality, and integrity of all the findings produced. And you need to make sure that there's transparency in the methodology. You need to always disclose the use of AI tools in your method section. Specify how and when AI was used at every stage, right? So we're saying now we're going to move on to the practical demonstrations of how to do. I'm going to do a 5 minutes practical demonstration bearing the aspect of time in mind, right? I'm not going to do the whole section. I'm just going to show you basically, but I'm going to use for the purposes of data security. I'm going to use to do a textual analysis, a content analysis that I'll basically do, and looking at the different prompts that we there available. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to provide a sample. I'll provide you a sample interview transcripts to participants and allow you some few minutes to see how to run that data and show you the different types of prompts that we'll use in that particular aspect, right? Then we'll do the theme development from codes to themes and demonstrate for you how that would pan out, right? And how you would then move from the themes to writing the actual chapter or the actual section in your dissertation, right? So the key takeaway is that AI can assist in thematic analysis, but it cannot replace the researcher's analytical thinking, interpretation, and intellectual responsibility. Analytical thinking, critical interpretation, and intellectual responsibility all remains the researcher's responsibility, and AI assists at the master analysis workshop. So thank you so much. This is our conceptual presentation. Now we're going to do a quick one on ChatGPT. We'll see how it goes, right? I'll check those hands that were raised so that we hear what the colleagues, if they have any questions about what we've done so far, as I prepare my screen for a quick demonstration of the thematic analysis approach. Right, any hands?
Thank you, sir. If I may, I just wanted to check with you. When we upload our data, there's always a concern in my institution. What or where does this data land? Is it safe to upload this data? How is the data protected so that it is not published somewhere else or accessible somewhere else? Can you just enlighten us a little bit about that? Thank you.
Yes, so you see the issue of data security, it's a very critical one, because to date we problems of the moment you upload your data on LLMs, right, on generative AI. The problem is that you are not guaranteed security of the data, right? You have actually lost control of what will happen with that data. But I know there are platforms like your Copilot, right, on Microsoft. That data, because of institutional arrangements with the different universities and stuff, if you're using those platforms, you might have your data not being uploaded to the cloud to, but stored within the institutional repository, right? Um, so those are issues that still we still grappling with as researchers in terms of data, right? But the data is normally encrypted in both in transit while being uploaded, and it also rest. It stays in their servers, right? For example, your chat GPT, it stays in their servers, and because we do not have local servers, and that we have, that data will can be used, right, to train those platforms, right? So your data can evenly be used by other people, right? You've exposed your data to um, um, other platforms or other people that will make use it. So even if you delete a chat or use temporary chat, um, OpenAI may retain that data for up to 30 days for safety and abuse monitoring, right? So in terms of the security of your data, it's not guaranteed, I should say, if you upload your data on those platforms. Right. So let's move on to do we have any other questions? Any other questions?
Okay, Doc. Good morning, Doc.
Morning.
Doc, there is a part whereby I missed the issue of cleaning the data before uploading it into the system.
Yes.
How do we clean the data?
Right. So by means of cleaning the data, we simply saying remove any identifiable information in the data, right? For remember, you guaranteed your participants that there is anonymity, confidentiality, and all those aspects. So any information that identifies a human being, that identifies your participants, it needs to be removed, right? And what other things you might need to remove there are the names of the people or any identifiable information, I should say, right? Because what happens is that if you're using OpenAI, even though it implements robust industry standard security measures, data security is not 100% guaranteed, right? So no cloud-based service can offer absolute protection against every possible risk, and your level of security depends heavily on your subscription plan and settings, right? All of those who are on free subscription version or those cheaper versions and stuff like that, that data is subject, it can be used for anything, right? That's why normally, if institutional subscriptions are the best way to go, for example, your your Copilot on Microsoft would be the best version because they have institutional agreements with that. But data cleaning, it simply means remove any identifiable information from that data. Remove anything that identifies anyone with that with that data, right? But the moment you upload that data, just know, rest assured that I can ask the same question about your data. It might not give me the exact information, but whatever you found in your study or whatever is in your data, I can get some sense when I prompt ChatGPT to do something for me that is that is in line with your work, right? So, for example, when we are running systematic reviews, when we are running summaries, we want to summarize data and all that, it might give us that option, right? It might expose your data to us, and we can have a a glimpse or a portion of what your data is shown, right? So I'm going to shift. Is there another hand? Is it Maleshwane?
Sorry, oh, sorry. Yeah.
No, Maleshwani is fine, Doc.
Okay.
I got covered. Thank you, Doc.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much for that question. Right. Is Lubadi? There is Lubadi. There's a hand from Lubadi. Lubadi, are you still there? I don't. Are you coming through? Right. There is a hand. Okay. Let's move on to Simi. Simi, thank you, Simi. You are here today again. Thank you for your consistency.
It's a public holiday. It's a long weekend, Doc. Thank you very much to you for always giving us a very good presentation. I intended not to make a question or make a comment today, but I'm triggered to just to share or make a comment to say, after all, after you have uploaded your document into AI tools, at the end of the day, if you have not read your work, if you have not immerse yourself into the work that you're uploading, it will be meaningless. The information that you'll get out from the AI tool, it will not mean anything if you have not read thoroughly your own work. Thank you, Doc.
Yes, thank you so much, Simi, for those insights. Right. So the idea is to get to understand your work yourself. Right. You need to understand the study. You need to understand the data itself and align it to the research questions. And remember that the idea of doing analysis of data is to answer the research questions that you set out in your proposal. That's the reason why we are doing this whole process. Right. So I'm gonna share here. I'm gonna do a quick one. Right. This won't be long. Understanding that we have time issues, time constraints. Right. Is Lubadi? Lubadi, I see you have a hand. Are you there? Right. I'm not sure what's happening there, but let's find out here what is going to happen. So I'm on ChatGPT, right? And the beauty of ChatGPT is that it gives us different. If you go to explore ChatGPT, depending on the version that you have, it has options for doing research and analysis, right? It says find, evaluate, interpret, and visualize information. You, depending on the kind of analysis that you need to do, right? It has market research and competitive analysis. Is ask your your PDF research assistant. This is for textual marketing, video summarizer, science-based, 2 hours worth of research in minutes, Scholar, ChatGPT, right? So you might want to look for, let's see if there is NVivo, right? NVivo, NVivo, right? Our common one, right? Let's see if we have NVivo. We don't have. Oh, there is NVivo. Yeah, your professional biostic instructor offering detailed software, right? So no, this is not NVivo, right? So we don't have NVivo here. I'm going to check if we have Atlas, right, for doing Atlas AI, right? Professional yet approachable. So this one here is your Atlas to conduct an thematic analysis, right? You do your thematic analysis. Let's see again, thematic analysis. The tools that we have available to do thematic analysis. So we have qualitative research data analysis, right? We have thematic analysis by Dr. Crivo, thematic analysis pro, thematic analysis expert. So we have different types of thematic analysis approaches that we have. We have thematic analysis to mesh initial codes, right? Then replace thematic analysis. So all these you can use, right? You can choose to use any of these to do your thematic analysis. So, but I'm not going to use any of these, right? I'm not going to use any of these. I'm just going to use the general platform for doing thematic analysis. And what I want to do here, I'm not going to use participants because I don't want to analyze, upload my data as yet on ChatGPT, right? Because of the issues of data security, right? So I'm going to do a content analysis, and I'm saying, first things first, we want to familiarize, right? The context is, right, I want to conduct a thematic analysis approach, right? Following Brown and Clark. It's very important to know the kind of thematic analysis approach that you need to use, because they're different. There is a reflexive one, then approach, right? So I want you, what is the role of of ChatGPT? You will act as a research assistant, conduct the six steps, six steps in the process, right? But first, I am going to upload the data, going to upload the data, right? And the type of my data, I need to explain that the type of my data is news articles, right? About, right, news reporting on, then I'm giving it context. What is the data about? Dlamini Zuma. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma presidential campaign, right? That's the context. So I'm going to upload 10 articles first. Then we begin the analysis process. So what I want to do, is I need to give this platform the study, right? The study information, right? So that we give it context. My study is focused on media reporting on women presidential aspirants in South Africa, right? Using feminist media theory and framing theory, right? The key questions that needs to be answered by the data, the key questions are, the first one is, how does the media frame NDZ, right? And then the second one is, what frames, what are the common frame, what are the common key frames used to report on NDZ, and how are these frames used to legitimize or delegitimize her political campaign. Right. So we have given it some parameters, right? Then I need to upload the data now. And I'm going to look for my data. And where is my data? I'm looking for my data. Just right. I can search here. I'm going to search NDZ. Right. Here's my data. Right. So I'm going to upload 10 of them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let's just upload 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 for the purposes of demonstration, right? ChatGPT text 10. Right, but there's another prompt that is coming to my mind. So let's say begin by step 1 of the thematic analysis approach. Right. And step 1 is familiarization, right, that we have in relation to our key questions. Then we click here. Let's see what the output is going to be. Now it's reading our data. Excellent. We'll proceed to process the math right bit without me telling it. It is already saying familiarization with the data, right? That's our first step. So this phase is foundational and interpretive, not yet analytical. The objective is to immerse ourselves in the data, identifying preliminary patterns, and begin sensitizing ourselves of gender framing, power narratives, and the legitimization strategy. So they say initial observation assets from the first page of the article, several recurring.
Doc, are you still there, or it is my side which has been disconnected?
Well, it's on
Right.
my side that I also lost
My screen
sound.
stopped sharing. I'm trying to get back to screen sharing. Broadcasting today. Just a moment. All right. There you go. Right. So what we have is so what we're seeing here is that the step one, it confirms that what we're doing here is a familiarization, and it says initial observation across uploaded articles. From the first batch of the articles, several recurring patterns emerge. The NDZ position within political context rather than agency. In the coverage, conference coverage article now is looking at every single article. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma is introduced primarily in relations to Ramaphosa. She's framed as former AU Commissioner Chair and Zuma's ex-wife. This introduced relational identity, right? Male counterparts, institutional, so feminist insights, they reflects a classic. So this is just basically, I can have an idea of what the data is saying, right, from the data that I've applied here. So it's telling me what the data is saying. So I have an idea of what the data is saying. I can click here and go straight to the article, right? The article here, I can download the article again and verify what that article is saying about this one. So I have an idea of what all that my data is saying now. Then I'm saying to, before we proceed, upload the remaining articles, right? I'm not going to need to upload the remaining articles, but the second step is step 2, generating initial codes. That's where we need to do. Proceed to step 2, confronting with the data set, right? Then I'm just going to say proceed to step 2, right? Let's proceed to step 2 and see. So remember, we're following the thematic analysis approach. So step 1 was familiarizing ourselves with the data. Then step 2 is that we now want to generate initial codes. Right, excellent. We now move to step 2 of Brown and Clark thematic analysis, generating initial codes. At this stage, the aim, so in what I love about this process is actually when you're reading through, you're actually learning and enhancing your knowledge in terms of how you would do this process manually. So where it's saying the aim is to work systematically through the data set and assign concise labels to segment of the texts that appear meaningful in relation to your research questions, because your study is guided by feminists and them and stuff like that. So now this becomes my initial codes, right? So it says a relational identification. This is the initial code. Then description, NDZ is identified through male political figures rather than as an autonomous political actor, right? Already I have an answer to say, how does the media frame or report on Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma when she wants to be president? Then it's giving me verbatims, right? She's described, or the examples from the data set, she's described as Zuma's ex-wife and positioned against Ramaphosa rather than introduced primarily through her own presidential credentials. And this is found in this article, ANC 54 Crunch Time, as delegates prepare for crucial vote. So these are my codes. I have how many codes? I have a lot of codes that emerged here, right? And it's giving me a table. So you can actually copy and paste this table. This becomes your coding frame, right? Or your coding table. You copy and paste it, you put it in an appendix, or you can actually put it in the methodology section, right? To say these are the initial codes when I was doing the codes, and this is what came out, right? Then coding articles more closely. Now here we are moving closer to generating the paragraphs of your data. So it says the first article is highly important because it gives us direct reporting on NDZ on campaign language, right? Then the second article now is going on article by article basis, an article basis, right? What step 2 is showing already is at this coding stage, 3 things are becoming very clear. First, NDZ is often framed through relation, defense, and suspicion, right? Now we are getting closer to themes. So we have themes about like and stuff like that, the relation, defense, and suspicion as we go, right? So these are our refined initial codes in your study. So these are how many codes? I have 18 codes, right? So methodological memo for your dissertational article, you can state the outcome of step 2 like this, right? Right, where we go next, we need to go to stage 3. So let's go proceed to step 3. Right, so step 3 is now bringing codes to teams, right? Bringing together codes that are more or less similar to make them themes, right? So we say candidate themes and codes clusters. Theme 1 will be NDZ as a relational and dependent political actor. Right, underlying idea, the idea is that NDZ is constructed not as an autonomous political presidential candidate, but as a figure defined through relationships, particularly to male political actors. And codes contributing to this theme is number 1, relational, etc. So it does that in empirical grounding. It gives you the studies or the from the data set where these themes are coming from. Then interpretation, this theme reflects a gender. Now is bringing in the aspect of the theories that I have spoken about, because I've grounded my theory, my analysis in the theory that I've mentioned, right? Then it goes on, it gives me how many themes that I have. So I'm gonna say to you here, before I get to review it, so let's review the themes, right? Let's move to step 4, right? But there's something that I want to show you that excites the examiners, right? Reviewing themes is that for level 1 review, initial coherence the themes, we begin by examining whether each candidate theme is internally consistent and analytical distinct, right? So theme 1, relational constructive of NDZ political identity assessment. This theme remains strong and coherent. All codes extract consistently show this, right? So we've done our coding and stuff like that. But what I want is, okay, it's still generating. What I want here to do before I move to the next step, right? It even gives me, before I move to step 5, I said I want a matrix table or a coding table that captures codes, initial themes, sub-themes, and verbatims from the data set, right? And the research question that each theme answers, right, in form of a matrix table. Right, there is one colleague of us who's I'm hearing myself in there. Right, so now this is basically a summary of everything that the thematic analysis process that has happened, right? So here the thematic coding matrix, media framing of Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, right? So these are my initial codes. And we've converted these codes to these 2 themes, right? It's one theme, right? Relational construction of political identity. Then the sub-theme is NDZ defined through male political figures. Then this is the verbatims from the data. Then this is analytical interpretation. So NDZ identity is mediated through Zuma, reinforcing dependence and limiting autonomous political legitimacy. Then it says this theme answers research question number 1. Then the second theme answers research question number 2 and 3. Then the third theme answers research question number 3. So what you can do is you basically say, for research question, depending on how you want to structure your thematic analysis in your dissertation, right? You would have research question themes. You have to take all the themes and codes that answer research question number 1 and structure them accordingly, right? So it says how to use this table in your study. It gives you direction. You can present themes narratively. Use this table, a supporting appendix, or condensed summary before detailed discussion. Then it also says analytical strength of this matrix. This table demonstrates rigor, transparency, theoretical depth, key analytical insights emerging from this metric. Right, it gives you one-step optional but recommended. Convert this into a full Q1 findings chapter section. We're not there yet, right? So what we're saying is now proceed to step 5. Right, we can take this table, copy and paste it, and just insert it in our dissertation right after we've verified. Right, so step 5, defining and naming themes. Right, so this is what you need to do. Relationally mediated theme, this is our first theme. This theme captures it, defining the theme, what it included, the codes that were included, what it excluded, empirical anchor, right, the examples, analytical interpretation, theoretical linkage, and etc. So I'm going to say, right, just one theme, right? I'm just going to say proceed to step 6 and provide only one theme in an academic paragraph in an academic writing format that's ready for examination. Right, do only theme 1. Right, so now this is how our theme 1 would look like, right, when we are actually writing or demonstrating it, when we are actually presenting it in our findings. But of course we're going to need to look back and see if it makes sense. So it says relationally mediated political identity, a dominant pattern emerging from the analysis, the relational construction of NDZ political identity, wherein her candidates is mediated through association with male political figures rather than articulated as autonomous leadership project. This theme reviews how media discourse systematically situates NDZ within a network of relational references, particularly Jacob Zuma, and to a lesser extent Cyril Ramaphosa, thereby constraining the perception of a independent political agents, in contrast to male counterparts who are framed as self-standing political actors. NDZ is discursively positioned as derivative, aligned or dependent, reflecting a gender logic of representation that is consistent with insight from feminist media. Remember, I've situated my analysis within the framing and feminist media theory, right? So it has all those pointers. This is directly straight from the data, right? So all these direct quotations, these are the verbatims that were taken from the data, and we have reference to this article where the data is taken from. So it has given me a rough draft of what my section, each and every theme would look like in my dissertation or my presentation. But remember, we said the key to have a good work in this particular case is always to go back and make reference to say, is this data accurate? Are these verbatims accurate from the data itself? But you need to align and attune this to your data analysis. Then I'm going to say arrange themes according to how they answer the research question of the study. Right, this is where we are. We need to look at how they answer to each research question. Thematic organization, right? Theme 1, theme 3, theme 4A, they're answering to research question number 1. Right, so all these themes here, so then you begin to do your analysis, etc., etc. So this is basically how we conduct a thematic analysis approach in your using the large language models. using AI and other platforms that we have at our disposal. I'm going to stop here and not proceed to do all the themes that we have, but just I thought we should just give you a heads up. But what is key in every presentation, in every way that you're doing, is to make sure that you do not replace your human judgment and critical evaluation of these themes, right, with the way that things are happening here on ChatGPT. Do not delegate your work to ChatGPT or these platforms, but make sure that you are always evaluating, you are always including your critical judgment whenever it is necessary. It's very important in that particular case. But what we've seen here is that this platform has given us a head start, right? We don't need to be doing. That's why I was emphasizing that the role of the researcher has been transformed and shifted from doing the dirty work to you becoming the curator of the data, and for you to become the authority in terms of grounding your work within context and also underpinning the work with theory and critical judgment always becomes the final bus stop before you get your work to reviewers, right? So this is it for the thematic analysis presentation for us today. I'm going to open this platform for questions from the colleagues, comments from the colleagues, right? But I want to emphasize that you should never replace human judgment with AI or critical thinking with these platforms. Make sure that you're always evaluating the work and reviewing the work that comes out from this. Over to you, colleagues, if we can have a few hands before we go back to enjoy our Easter holidays. Any questions? Any comments, colleagues, before we call it a day? All right, Tame.
Yes, Doc, I was going to say this was very impressive, and thank you so much for all your time and all the support that you are giving to us. Thank you, and thank you.
All right, appreciate it. Thank you so much for the positive feedback. Colleagues, I want to remind you that those who are based in Durban, there is a masterclass on writing 3 chapters of your PhD or master's or whatever, or your manuscripts. We're having a 3-day intensive workshop masterclass in Durban. Then we'll arrange for those in the different provinces, and we'll let you know as time proceeds. But in Durban, we on from the 1st to the 3rd of May, we're going to have an intensive workshop. We've already circulated the invitation, register while time lasts, so that you won't miss the opportunity to complete at least 3 of your chapters in 3 days, or 3 of your manuscripts in 3 days with us. We're using different AI tools and with our facilitators in Durban. Thank you so much. I see that these people are enjoying the holidays, and I don't want to keep you for long. Thank you so much, and have a blessed week ahead. If there are no comments or questions, thank you so much. Bye.